Greetings and welcome to Science Biology. Let us begin. Today we'll be taking notes on the subject of classification, the next subject that we are going to be studying. And I'm going to walk us through the notes today as you write them down on your sheet of paper. What fun.
Make us a sign!
All right. Classification is actually based in Genesis 2 verses 19 and 20. And this is Adam and Eve and the Lord. And it says, "Now the Lord God had formed out of the ground all the wild animals and all the birds in the sky. And he brought them to the man to see what he would name them. And whenever the man called each living creature, that was its name. So the man gave names to all the livestock, the birds in the sky, and all the wild animals." Now, why is that special? Because that's really the basis of classification, naming and identifying animals. And when God had Adam do this, this was an exercise in human intelligence. To name in ancient cultures is more than just slapping a label. It's more than superficial. It's more than animals walking past and saying, tiger, lion, bear, oh my. It meant to know the characteristics and behaviors and patterns of what you had named. When we learn the science of classification, which we're going to do this chapter, when we learn about all these organisms, we participate in that first role God had Adam doing. That is to name and to fully know the creation. It's part of what we're created to do. So, let's get started. The fancy name for it is taxonomy. That's the field of biology that identifies and classifies organisms. They go out, they find them, and then they try to figure out what are they.
Cage matches? Yeah, they work. How could they not work? If they didn't work, everybody would still be in the cage.
In order to do taxonomy, you have to be able to observe animals and plants and living things, and you have to say, what are their characteristics? What do these things have in common? And does it look like they're related to other things that are also similar, that have similar characteristics? And the more they're related, the more you group them together. We'll look at an example in a second.
That's so funny. The last time I heard that, I laughed so hard I fell off my dinosaur.
So here's an example. There's a submarine at the bottom of the Indian Ocean, 2005, and this thing comes crawling across their screen. They're able to capture it, and they're like, what the heck is that? Because they've never seen anything like this before. And it's about the size of a dinner plate, but it's covered in hair. And if you look at it, it's got a hard shell, and that shell is made out of something called chitin, a protein. So that indicates that it's some sort of crustacean. We know that. And we know other crustaceans are things like lobsters and crabs and things like that. And as you look at it, it's got the pinchers, it's got the body shape, it's got the appendages that match up to a lobster or a crab. So eventually this thing was nicknamed the Yeti lobster because all that crazy hair. And those hairs help detoxify a lot of toxic chemicals that you find around those ocean vents down at the bottom of the ocean. And then they eat their food there as well. Here's another example. We look at all of these pictures on the screen and we say, what do these have in common? Well, they all have tails. They all have like upper and lower appendages that function differently. They have highly mobile joints in their hands. They have eyes that are front instead of on the side. That usually indicates more of a predator species than a prey. Very good with balance. A lot of them live in trees. So these are all grouped into a category that we call monkeys, and specifically New World monkeys. They all have a lot of the same traits. So who came up with this? Let's look at the history. There was a guy named Carl, but don't remember that because it changes. Carl von Linne in the 1700s, and he said, we need to have different categories. So he called those categories the taxa. They're different levels. A single one's called a taxon. And he put them in an order from the most specific to the broadest, and it looks like this.
Just when I think you couldn't possibly be any dumber, you go and do something like this. And totally redeem yourself!
Kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, species. Kingdom being the biggest, not now, but when Carl developed this, it was. And species being the most specific. You can't get any more specific than that. So, go ahead and write those down. Kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, species. And in this chapter, you'll go a long ways if you can remember the order.
Oh, and Brennan, Denise called and she said she can't go out with you on New Year's Eve because she's not your girlfriend, she's your therapist.
Is that what she said?
Yeah.
She's a rascal.
These categories apply to just about everything. There's a couple weird exceptions, like the plant kingdom. Instead of using phylum, they have something called divisions. But by and large, this works for bacteria, protists, fungi, all the animals, and things like that. How to remember this order, then?
King Philip came over for green spinach.
The most common way that people remember this is to make an acronym. So the most popular acronym is King Philip came over for green spinach. That sentence, the first letter of each word in that sentence, is also the first letter of each word for kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, species in the right order. King Philip came over for green spinach. All right, if you want to come up with your own, that's fine. Some people just try to say it 3 times fast, like kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, species. Like kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, species. Like kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, species. Or, again, King Philip came over for green spinach. Whatever you can remember best. Here's an example where this comes into play. So we're looking at the bottom, there's the order. That's the order Carnivora. All right, the carnivores. And these are all animals, so they're in the kingdom Animalia. And there's our order. And then if you look at this carnivora order, at least on the screen, is broken down into 3 families. There are more families than that. The Felidae, the Mustelidae, and the Canidae. And even more specifically, there's some genuses up there. More are actually exist than are listed on this page. But you see that for the cat, there is the Felis genus. And for the Mustelidae, there's 2 genuses, Lutra and Mephitis. And then you can see the pictures. The Lutra is the European otter. And the Mephitis is the striped skunk. In Canis, there's a couple of examples of different species in the Canis genus. The domestic dog, as well as the wolf Canis lupus. So that's just a little bit of a sampling of how the kingdom, phylum, class, family, genus, species thing works. And I forgot order. A brief history, because this has changed from now back to Carl's time. Linnaeus, he said there's really just 2 kingdoms, plants and animals. Well, after the invention of the microscope, we realized there's tons of small stuff all over the place. So they added a 3rd kingdom, called Protista, and then people realized, you know what? Fungi aren't plants. They kind of look like plants, but they're not. There are some fundamental differences between fungi and plants. So they got their own kingdom, and then they discovered bacteria exist, and they don't even have a nucleus, so they're not anything like protists, so they got their own kingdom, Monera. And recently, because of DNA stuff, they have said there's actually 2 giant different types of bacteria, and they're fundamentally different. So they have to be in 2 different kingdoms. In fact, they're so different even from other things, they have a whole new taxa called the domain. So there is a domain called Archaebacteria or Archaebacteria. There's a domain for Eubacteria, and there's a domain for Eukarya, which is anything that has a nucleus. All right, and that's divided into 6 kingdoms.
Hey, there's something you don't see in a toilet every day.
So let's quick survey these kingdoms. How does something end up in each one? So the Eubacteria kingdom, which is part of the bacteria domain, those are the common bacteria, type that you'd find on your skin and in your hands and on the countertops and growing on living things. They're single-celled. They don't have a nucleus. The word for that is prokaryotic. They do have cell walls, but their cell walls have a chemical called peptidoglycan. And one weird thing about all eubacteria is they don't start their proteins with met. They're like the anarchists. They don't follow the rules like everybody else. Common examples, E. coli, streptococcus, the type that causes strep throat. All right, next kingdom is the Archaebacteria. Today, you'll only find them in the extremes of environmental conditions. They like it where it's super hot, like a hot spring in Montana, Yellowstone. They like it super salty, like the Dead Sea, or they like it in places where there's no oxygen, like swamps and sewage tanks and things like that. They don't have a nucleus. They have cell walls. I screwed this up. Eubacteria should say without, and archaebacteria are with peptidoglycan. If you can put without up there, letter A, otherwise that makes no sense. And they do start their proteins with met. They are the rule followers like everybody else. Some examples: halophiles are types of bacteria that really like it salty. Methanogens are the type that release methane, and they don't like oxygen. All right, let's move on.
Hey, there's something you don't see in a toilet every day.
Protista are, some of them are unicellular, like an amoeba. Some of them are multicellular. The point of most protists is they're not very specialized. Like plants and animals are specialized. We got all these different tissues. Protista doesn't really have a variety of specialization.
Do you have any hobbies?
I collect spores, molds, and fungus.
All right. And fungi are multicellular, eukaryotic, with cell walls. They have a little bit of specialization. They get their nutrition, they eat by dissolving other things. They release digestive enzymes onto other things. Molds, yeasts, the type of fungi that produce mushrooms, for example. Kingdom plantae are multicellular, eukaryotic. That means they do have a nucleus, specialized cells, and most of them are autotrophic. That means they can produce their own food. If you can't, then you're heterotrophic. Moss, a rose, a tree, grass, corn.
And when the doctor said I didn't have worms anymore, that was the happiest day of my life.
And the last kingdom we're looking at is Animalia. This is multicellular, eukaryotic. They're heterotrophic, so they can't make their own food. They have to eat other things for nutrition. And they have specialized cells, but they don't have cell walls. Worms, humans, dogs, all the animals.
Dear baby, welcome to Dumpville. Population, you.
This picture is a little outdated. It shows 5 kingdoms. The one at the bottom, Kingdom Monera, you'll oftentimes see for all of bacteria, so I want you to have heard that word, but actually bacteria are now split into 2 totally different domains. Now deep thoughts. You know what's one thing that would make pirates real mad? Treasure chests with no handles. How the heck are you supposed to carry those things? Okay. Carl von Linne, that name I told you not to remember, also realized we have a problem. When we name animals, different places have different names for the same animal. A crayfish, what we call it in West Michigan, my father-in-law from South Carolina calls him a crawdad. We got some crawdads. Over in Arkansas, they might call it a mudbug or a rock lobster. So there's a lot of different ways you can tell. And if you call up Russia, they'll call it a shrinich. I just made that up. So how do we universally name animals so that we can all agree, and no matter who's doing what and talking, we're all on the same page? Carl has a system.
This is a simple acronym, HERO. At Diversity Today, we believe it's very easy to be a hero. All you need are honesty, empathy, respect, and open-mindedness.
Excuse me?
Yeah.
I'm sorry, but that's not all it takes to be a hero.
Oh, great. Well, what is a hero to you?
A hero kills people. People that wish him harm.
Okay.
A hero is part human and part supernatural. A hero is born out of a childhood trauma or out of a disaster that must be avenged.
Okay, you're thinking of a superhero.
We all have a hero in our heart.
So Carl said we'll use Latin. That's the universal language. Still exists today. We'll use 2 words, and it'll be the genus and the species for the system he created. The name of this system is now called binomial nomenclature. Sounds complicated, but it really means bi for 2, nomial for name, and nomenclature means name system, the 2-name naming system. Carl was so excited about this system, he legally changed his name to Carolus Linnaeus. That's why we don't remember him as Carl anymore. Carolus Linneaus. Sometimes when you're writing this out, you can abbreviate the genus with a letter, and there's a couple other grammar rules I'm about to show you. Here's an example. This is a bug discovered recently. One of the privileges of taxonomy is when you discover something new, you get to name it. So this bug is called Strigophilus, that's the genus, Gary Larsoni. And Gary Larson was a cartoonist who did a lot of cartoons about bugs. His cartoon was called The Far Side. Hopefully there's a couple of fans out there. It's really funny. I'm going to show you some examples and you're just going to stare. Here is another bug discovered recently named after Steve Colbert. It's got the species and the genus name.
Hello. Hello, Gene. You're a stupid head.
Homer, is that you?
Our name is Homo sapiens, so our genus is Homo, and our species name is sapiens, and that stands for wise person. Now, a couple of rules here. You capitalize the genus, but not the species. And if you're typing it, you italicize it. If you're writing it, you underline it. Here's some far sides. There's these spiders, and they made a web right on the slide. Except they actually get a baby stuck in there, that will be like this huge meal. Here is a wasp reading a horror story, and it's a spray can of wasp spray. That's like their worst fear. It came from the garden shed. It's that kind of humor. He's got insects in it. If you don't, here's another one of his with dinosaurs. The real reason dinosaurs became extinct. They're all smoking behind like a cliff. That's why they died out. Little known fact. This reminds me. A little known fact. I have never actually had a cigarette. Yep, I know none of you had heard that before, but it's actually true. How does science classify? What do you do? What are the criteria? Basically 3 things. How you develop in the womb or the egg or the seed. That's called embryology. The physical characteristics, which we were talking about earlier, like with the monkeys. And nowadays, you compare DNA and protein from one organism to another and say how much DNA and protein do they have in common. Okay? So here is a breakdown of the wolf in terms of its species all the way to its domain. You can see it gets broader and broader and broader and less specific as you go up, or more and more specific as you go down. This chart is in your notes. It's a real handy summary of all the domains and kingdoms that we've covered. So you probably will refer to this in your homework quite a bit. And I'm going to leave you with a video of literally the worst song I think I've ever heard.
His name was Linneaus, observing life through